Hi everyone. I'm sorry it's been a while. I've actually been on holiday for the last week and didn't get round to posting a video before I went. So I've been having fun, and I imagine you haven't missed me too much. But I have also been reading. It's also incredibly bright and sunny in here today. The UK is having a very cold, very sunny couple of days, which is completely glorious to come back from holiday to. It was in France for a week, but also makes filming look a bit odd. Anyway. It's bright and sunny. So I just finished reading on the plane on the way home The Gallows Pole by Benjamin Myers, which I started because it was on the long list for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, for which the shortlist just came out last week. And this book didn't make it to the shortlist. But having bought it because it was long-listed and having seen quite a lot of Benjamin Myers' activity on Twitter and elsewhere, and having read other people's fantastic reviews of this book, I was really looking forward to reading it. So that's what I've been doing the last 3 or 4 days. So it is a longish novel. It's set in the late 18th century, and it tells the story of a group of outlaws in West Yorkshire, which is where I grew up, who are clipping the edges off coins and melting them to make new coins, which is a treasonable offence, a capital offence at the time. And they're doing this in the context of the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution starting in northern England, and the building of mills and of canals through the area that they're living in, which is the Calderdale Valley, in West Yorkshire, just to the east of the Pennines. And what they are outlaws because they are acting highly illegally, but also because they are doing what they're doing in part in order to feed the starving hill people whose land is being bought up by the mill owners, who are then sending children to work for 14 hours a day in cotton mills. So it's in that sense quite a political book. Very much about the power and the change in the balance of power in that particular part of England in the late 18th century. It's a very interesting book for me to read because it is set in an area about 10 miles from where I grew up, and it's an area I know very well and where I have very good friends living today. In fact, the village Cragvale, which the outlaws take their name from, is actually a place where some very good friends of mine live. So it's an area I know really well. And it is a vision of England which is so different from the typical vision of England. It made me remember when I first read Jane Austen as a teenager, and everything was being described as the Garden of England and this beautiful English countryside. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. It did not click with any vision of England that I understood from the England that I'd grown up in. The England I grew up in was the England of Wuthering Heights, and also of this book. So from that point of view, it's very much a book of the north of England, and in my view, all the better for that. And it's the story of these outlaws effectively being brought to task, of their reign coming to an end as they are overtaken by the educated lawyers who are out to get them, and by the powers that be, the powers of the establishment, which are overruling them and eventually taking them to task and landing them in jail. And the Gallows Pole, which starts and ends the novel, is where the hanged villains are strung up and their bodies are left to be torn apart by birds and by insects and by the weather. The weather is a big force in this book. But it's not a book entirely in praise of these outlaws, I think it's fair to say. It does a very good job of balancing the absolute brutality and almost bestiality of some of their behaviour and the murders and the tortures that they get up to, with the sense that they are doing something that is good for some of the people. And that was something I really liked about it. It would have been very easy to make this book romantic about the role that the outlaws were playing, and it absolutely doesn't do that, and I think is a much better book for it. And it actually turns rather cleverly at the end toward it's the point of view, not from the point of view of the narrative, but the feeling that we get as readers changes over the course of the book. So initially we are very much in the minds and in the lives of the coiners, and we understand how difficult their lives are, and we also understand what makes them tick. And then there's a short period, about 2/3 of the way through the novel, where we're into the minds of the God-fearing, law-abiding men who are trying to bring them down. And it gives us a bit of a sense of the other side of the picture. And then as the leader of the coiners, David Hartley, is in jail at the end, we get a sense again of his grandiosity, in that his self-styled name, King David, is completely over the top, but also a sense of the romance of his position, and that he has done something for the poor people of his area, which has not been done for them by the law-abiding establishment men who have brought him down. So it's a very clever book in the way that it almost shifts our sympathies over the course of the book within these between these different sets of characters, without leaving us a sort of simple place to land, but at the same time making it absolutely clear that this was a brutal group of men, and the story is almost entirely about men. Women appear periodically. It's a story about men, and at the same time they have this sort of grandeur about them. And there's a double narrative running. So we have a third-person narrative telling the story of the gang of coiners and what is happening to them, and the excisemen, the taxmen who are going after them. But interspersed with that, we have the written memoirs of David Hartley, who is in jail from the very beginning of this book, in this second narrative strand, which are written in an illiterate but rather poetic voice, and which give us a sense of his character, but also his greed, his, as I say, grandiosity, his foolhardiness, his naivety. And so you have these two running together throughout the book, which I rather liked as an effect. I thought it worked very well. In the description of the area, it reminded me very much of a book I raved about last year, which was Reservoir 13 by Jon McGregor. And actually, it's of a very, very similar part of the world. So Reservoir 13 is set in the Peak District, which is about 10 miles, 15 miles maybe, due south of where this book is set. But it's the same bogland and moorland, and the little valleys, the steep little valleys which cut into that moorland and which are highly inhospitable, but have these little communities clinging to them, which are at mercy and thoroughly attuned to changes in the weather and changes in the seasons. And in that sense, the book had, although the story itself was completely different and the period in which it's set was completely different, it had some of that feel as well. And I just wanted to read you one page of that, because I think there's some rather lovely description in here. It's not such beautiful writing as Reservoir 13, but there is, again, a huge sense of place in this book, which I absolutely loved. So here goes, here's a page. The night came in like a bruise of purples and blues, and then finally gripped so tight that the sky was black and broken by the weight of time impressing upon it. Dawn would melt the night in fading yellows, but for now the sun seemed like an impossibility, a dead concept, a foreign country. Geese flew in a V-flight down through the centre of it, the chevron following the hollow cleft of the valley and the black and silver waters of the river Calder below. The noise they made was a music of sorts. The measured rhythmic honk of the lead bird was like an unoiled gate in the rising wind that signals the coming of a storm, and the fine feathered sound of 7 sets of wings pistoning in perfect precision, a symbol of their stamina and streamlining. Their beautiful grey blades sliced the air and sheared the sky as they crossed a large Imbolc moon. I don't know what that is. And the moment of silence that followed in their wake created a brief window in the night, a space soon to be filled by the rustling of leaves, the clicking of branches, the snittering of tumbling young badgers at play, and the lone distant scream of a fox in search of a mate. The night was not eternal, though. It was shortening, and at first light fresh snowdrops quivered like rung bells, the peal of dawn birdsong their accompanying soundtrack. Their delicate, oversized white crowns hung heavy on thin green stems like the heads of newborn babies. Then, as the sun rose and spread its rejuvenating rays across the valley base, the snowdrops moved with it, slowly tilting their chins skywards to drink in the warmth. They turned and lifted as one, nested chicks in search of sustenance, and found it there in the Yorkshire sky. Spring. So there's some really beautiful passages like that. And then you get other passages of men being brutally tortured or brutally murdered, and you also get this sort of fake 18th century illiterate testimony of a man who is in jail under fear of being hanged. So it's a novel with many voices, all of which fit together really very well, and I have to say I like that very much. The other thing I liked was the joy in the sense of place in this book, which is there more quietly in Reservoir 13. But really clearly in this. So in the place names, in the people's names, in the use of local dialect. So the place names, they're wonderful in this area. So Mytham Royd and Luddondon Foot and Hebden Bridge and Crag Vale, and they're wonderful evocative names. They're the names of this is the area where Ted Hughes lived and worked and was buried. Hepton Stall as well. It's that same sort of hard Yorkshire country moorland people and their fight against the establishment coming in to gentrify the land around them. So I loved that. I loved that joy in the book. And there was it's set in the late 18th century. It's clever in its use of language because it doesn't attempt to fake 18th century writing in a consistent way. And partly Myers can get away with that because he is, by definition, almost writing the stories of people who are illiterate. So we don't expect them to speak in the way that people would speak in Jane Austen. Her novels are slightly later, but only slightly later than the setting of this book. So we don't get any sort of fake Austen-esque language, except a tiny little bit when we're listening to the establishment figures speaking. And so there is an immediacy to the language which I think carries this book along, and it's a hugely compelling story, a saga almost. But at the same time, there are little bits of the placing of words which feel not quite modern, and do give that sense through the writing of the 18th century as well. And then you get David Hartley's testimony in this illiterate or semi-illiterate 18th century pseudo language, which I won't attempt to recreate because if I speak it, it doesn't show the difference anyway. I did wish, as I was thinking which bits of this I might want to read out, if any, that I could do the strong Yorkshire accent of the area this is set in. I didn't dare read out sections of the testimony of the leader of the gang of King David without doing that Yorkshire accent. So you'll have to read it yourselves to see that. But this was a book I really enjoyed, The Gallows Pole. It is. I'll go and look out what Ben Myers has written before this. It's not his first novel. It's his third or fourth. And as I say, I really enjoyed its sense of place. And its joy in its sense of place, its sense of really writing down something which needed to be told. And I love the fact that it's a part of the world that I know extremely well, and I've been to most of the places described in this book. I got married in one of them. So huge joy to read this book, and highly recommended if any of that sounds like your sort of thing. And I will be back fairly soon with the next video. My intention is to get one in rather quicker than the previous few have been coming through. So if you're interested, then watch this space. Something else will be coming soon. Bye bye.